Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I'm doing some French Country basket makeovers. For the first project, I'm going to be giving this little mini basket case here a makeover. It actually reminds me a little bit of a picnic basket. Now, I really loved the shape, but I wasn't too keen on the orange color or that green stripe. So I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Driftwood mineral paint over the top of the entire piece. Paint Couture's mineral paint has a built-in primer and a built-in top coat, so I'm definitely saving myself a few steps by using this. You could probably use this in a sprayer if you prefer to spray your paint, or you could get a spray can of some kind and paint this. That would probably be the easier option, but I really enjoy painting baskets, so this wasn't too hard at all, and it only really took one and a bit coats. The second coat was just a little touch-up. I'm going to be painting the entire outside of the basket, the bottom of the basket, and I'm also going to be opening it up and painting the inside as well. If I inspire you to try any of the Paint Couture products used in today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put it in the description and on the screen. I just get a little thank you from Paint Couture in return. Next, when my paint was completely dry, I took out IOD's Lover of Flowers transfer pack, and I'm going to be cutting out this lovely daisy image. I really love the colors on this, and I think it's going to go beautifully with our driftwood. I am going to be taking out some drop cloth scraps that I have. This is just a little rectangle of the fabric, and right here I'm just working out how much I'm going to need to be able to use it with the transfer. I'm just tearing my edges so that they have a vintage frayed look, and then once I'm happy with the size of that, I'm going to peel the backing off the transfer and then position that in the bottom section. I decided I wanted to make the little patch, or whatever you want to call it, a little bit smaller, so we're putting it down the bottom. And then once I'm happy with that, I'm going to press down. I'm then going to use my transfer stick to go over the top of the entire image. Now, I always have one hand holding that transfer down, especially on fabric, because obviously it can move and I don't want to accidentally slip and then tear my transfer. So I'm making sure it's all down. Then I'm picking a corner, lifting that up and rubbing as I go. And I especially go a little bit slower when I'm doing the transfer on any sort of fabric, because some areas will stick quicker than others. You've got to be really careful of all those little edges and all those little details. It's just best to go slow so that you don't accidentally wreck your transfer. You'll also notice that I cut off the word daisy from down the bottom. I wasn't sure if I was going to use it, but in the end, after I've burnished down the entire design and trimmed it to size, I did decide to grab that little daisy label, and I'm going to be adding that down the bottom underneath our design. I'm going to be attaching our little floral patch to the top of the basket using my hot glue gun. I'm going to be putting little dabs of glue in each of the corners and also at certain points along the sides as well, just so that it's nice and secure. I didn't use any hot glue just in case I decided that I wanted to change over what patch I was using. I would just reheat and reactivate that glue, and I'll be able to swap it over if I want to make a change. Once I have that all completely stuck down, I decided to take out these little thumbtacks. They're a lovely gold color, and I'm just going to press them through the basket. The top section is thick enough that I'm not having any issues with it staying in there, and it's not going to affect anything on the inside. So I'm going to put one in each corner, and I actually really love the gold here because it ties in really nicely with the colors on the daisy transfer. I'd like to mention that I also took the little floral patch outside and I sprayed it with Rust-Oleum's Clear Matte Sealer. And here's our first finished basket. I really love how this turned out, and I think it's a very versatile piece. I could see this being used for seed storage, perhaps as a little sewing box to keep your threads and buttons in. Lots of possibilities. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Our next project is quite unique. This is a cane basket jug of sorts, and as soon as I saw it, I knew I had to grab it. I thought it was just really lovely and unique. Now I love the shape of it, but I don't love the color. So I'm going to take out some of Dixie Belle's chocolate chalk paint. I'm still working through my stash of that, and I'm going to water that down to create a paint wash. I'm going to stir that together, and once I'm happy with the consistency, I'm going to be taking out just a chip brush, and I'm going to start going over the top of the outside of our cane jug basket. I don't want this to look painted as such. I want it to look stained and toned. I don't love the orange color of it, so this is going to give it more of a French country look in my opinion. So I'm going to work my way around the jug, adding that wash, and anytime that it gets a little bit thick, I can always grab my water mister and I can water it down. I am working with a wash, so that's the beauty of that, or I could come in with a paper towel or a wet wipe to wipe it back a little, but I'm finding that the wash is really the perfect consistency for me to just brush it on and work my way around the jug until I have the entire piece covered. Now you can see here I did water that part down a little bit. Now I only did one coat. However, if this wasn't dark enough for you, you could come in with a second coat and keep going until you were happy with it. Or you could come in with a whitewash. Maybe this is a bit too dark for what you're after. Now I did do the entire outside of the jug. I did the inside lip around what would be considered the spout of the jug, but I didn't go all the way down on the inside as that was a little bit too tricky to reach, and you can't really see that very well anyway. You could leave it here, but I want to attach a label. So I've taken out my drop cloth and I'm going to measure out a length of that fabric and cut it to the size that I want. I'm going to be tearing the edges as I'm getting it to the size that I want so that we have more of that vintage frayed edge look. I'm using drop cloth for my label today because it's affordable and easy for me to customize, but you could use any sort of fabric. I'm then going to take out IOD's Mercantile stamp. This is from their latest release, and I'm going to be using that center design there. I'm going to be adding that on top of the drop cloth. I'm going to be using IOD's permanent black ink. I'm inking that up. You probably want to go a little bit heavier with the ink when you are working with fabric as opposed to adding it to a painted surface, because you do want it to soak in and be visible. You might find it to be a little bit too faint if you don't go a little bit heavier. So I'm pressing it down in the center and really working it into that fabric. I'm also pulling it back at times to check if I'm happy with how that impression is looking. And then once I'm happy with how it's looking, I'm going to pull it straight up. I then heat set the ink with my hairdryer on the hottest setting, moving it around for about 2 minutes. You could use an iron for this step as well on a cotton setting with no steam. I want to give my label more of a vintage look, so I'm using Paint Couture's light brown sugar glaze. I'm going to take a little bit out, just put it on a plastic lid, and then I'm going to apply my water mister over the top of the fabric, get it a little bit wet, and I've watered down the glaze. I'm applying it over the top of our stamped design. I've already heat set that, so I'm not worried about that ink running, and I'm just going to continue to apply that glaze until I have the whole thing covered. If you don't have a glaze or a paint wash that you want to use, you could always coffee or tea dye this instead. When my fabric was dry, I decided to come back in and apply the same stamp again. I've added some more ink to my ink pad, so it's very fresh. It's going to be a lot more juicy, if you want to say that. So I'm inking that up really well. I'm going to position that exactly over the same spot that we just had it on, and I'm pressing down. Again, I'm going to do little checks to make sure that I'm happy with how that's going to look, and then I will pull that straight up. To attach my label, I'm going to secure it in place first with a couple of beads of hot glue. So I'm just going to apply it to the cane basket itself and then press my label down. I'm going to apply a little bead of glue in each of the corners and on each of the sides. So this is just going to hold it there in place. We are going to be actually decoupaging this on, but the glue is going to hold it in place while that decoupage medium is drying and really sort of almost sucking that label to the surface of the cane. You'll actually be able to see the texture of the cane through that. I definitely recommend that you do use hot glue for this step as opposed to super glue. I have tried to use that before, and what I find is that it actually stains the fabric and it actually comes back through underneath. So learn from my mistake, only use hot glue for this step. Next, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Decoupage Medium in Matte. I'm going to really soak that fabric and really work that product into the fabric and onto the cane basket. You can see I'm pressing quite hard. I really want to be able to see the cane underneath. That's a really good sign that I've got it soaked enough and that it's going to stick and stay there the way that I want it to. So I'm going to continue to apply that decoupage medium. I really only found that I needed to do one coat for this. I found that that was enough to secure it in place. And don't panic if you see that it's sort of changing the color of your label, because as it dries, that is going to disappear. It's going to go back to the way that it looked. So as long as you make sure that you have heat set that ink and you've made sure that everything's really dry before you're applying it. And here's our finished jug basket. I'm really happy with how this turned out. That wash has toned the basket beautifully and the IOD stamp label finishes it off perfectly. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next project, I'm going to be working on this flat basket tray. I'm going to first of all measure out some drop cloth because I'm basically going to be treating this like a frame. So we're going to be creating our own artwork that's going to sit in the center of the basket. So I'm going to trim the drop cloth to the size that I want, always double checking how it's going to sit because I'm envisioning the art that we're creating is going to sit on the indented part of the basket. You could flip it over and use the back as well if you wanted. So I'm just cutting it to the size that I am going to want, and I am also going to be tearing and fraying the edges as well, again for that vintage look. Next, I need to iron out the fabric for what we want to do, so I'm going to wet it with my mister first, and then I'm using my craft iron. You could always use an iron that has a steam setting for this, but I'm just out in my shop, so I don't have that with me. I only have my craft iron, so that's a good idea if that's all you've got. I'm then going to be using Paint Couture's Extreme Guard in Gloss, and I'm actually going to lay down a coat of that Extreme Guard over the top of the fabric. Ultimately, what I'm wanting to do here is to seal the fabric a little bit for our next step, because if the product seeps in too quickly, it's just not going to work what I want to do. So I'm going to lay down a full coat and then I'm going to dry that really well, front and back. Next, I'm going to be using a piece from the Melange inlay. This is going to be the second use, and I previously used it with paint. I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Gloss Extreme Guard top coat again. I'm going to lay down another very generous coat because when you're using paint inlays, they need to go into a wet paint product, or you can use a clear coat. Something to keep in mind is that this is not going to be perfect. This is the second use of this paint inlay, so it's going to be more faded. It's not going to be as detailed. So I am already knowing that it's going to look very worn, very vintage, very faded, but that's perfect. That's fine for our project today. So once I've got a nice generous coat down, I'm going to lay my paint inlay design side down and I'm going to start smoothing it out with my fingers. I've got a lot of wrinkles in this one, but that's fine. It's not going to affect the use. And then I'm going to take my water mister and I'm going to mist the inlay really well. This is going to help to activate those paint pigments in the inlay. And then I'm going to take a wet wipe and I'm going to start smoothing my design down further, spreading that water, really making sure my entire design is saturated and down. I let that dry completely and then I took out my mister and misted it again. You really want to soak this again really well to help it to be able to release. And then I picked a corner and I started pulling it back. I was a little bit nervous that I wasn't going to see any of the design, but once I got to the areas that would have been more heavily pigmented, I could see that beautiful artwork coming through. So again, you can see it's a lot lighter. It's actually almost like a brown color. The text isn't as bright, but that's okay. This is meant to look like a vintage artwork, maybe a scrap off an artist's canvas, and the basket is going to be our frame. So I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. I think it looks lovely and vintage. I'm then going to turn my attention to the basket. I am going to be giving that basket the same chocolate water mix that we created, the wash that we added to the jug. I'm going to be applying that over the entire basket. I think the contrast of the chocolate wash compared to the light tone of the drop cloth and obviously the paint inlay design is going to be really lovely. I think it will pair really well together. So I only did one coat of this wash over the entire basket, so I did flip it over and do the other side. So I went with pretty natural colors that you would probably see on a lot of baskets and cane products naturally, but you could definitely go in a different direction. I think this could look lovely in perhaps a duck egg blue wash. It really does depend on your style and obviously also what artwork you're going to make, because you could go in any direction with this. It just depends what artwork you're going to create. After my basket was dry, I took out my paint inlay artwork that I created and I'm going to start attaching it with hot glue, just adding little beads of glue in each of the corners and along the edges. Now I did seal the fabric with Rust-Oleum's satin clear coat off camera. I sealed that with a spray sealer because sometimes when you're brushing on a clear coat you can reactivate those pigments, and I didn't want to accidentally do that and wreck the lovely faded artwork that we created. Another reason that I'm using hot glue is so that if I want to change this out, I can just reactivate that glue with a heat gun and I could put a different artwork that I made in there. Once I was finished attaching it, I took out some white wax and I'm going to be going over the entire outside sections of the basket. I'm loving how the white wax is catching all of the beautiful details in that cane. Now, if you don't have wax, you could achieve a similar result by dry brushing on some white chalk paint perhaps. I just really loved how this caught those details, really highlighted them, but it was still subtle enough that it didn't detract from the artwork. And here's our finished basket wall art. I'm really pleased with this project. It was fun to try something different, and I definitely think this is a really great way to display some handmade art. I could see this on the wall or on a shelf, lots of possibilities. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For our final two projects today, I'm going to be using these sweet little baskets with handles. Now they are two different sizes, so I thought they would be a lovely little set. I thought I'd have to cut those handles off, but I was able to actually pull the handles out. I'd say the glue that was holding them in place has probably since dried up, so that was lucky. So I'm removing those. Now my thought with this was that I would create two little pedestal baskets. So I have these little candlesticks that I bought online. I think you can get them from Amazon, and I was going to attach them to the bottom of both. Ultimately, I only end up doing that to one. I'm going to be preparing the surface of the candlesticks with Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in grey, and I am doing this because they are a very slick surface, so I need to make sure that I prime this so that my paint will stick and stay there. So I'm going to do 2 coats on my little candlestick bases and let them dry completely. Next, I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Farmhouse Linen Chalk Paint. I'm going to be applying it to the candlestick bases. I'm just doing it in a dabbing and stippling motion, again to reduce the appearance of brush strokes. And I did end up doing 3 coats of this just to get the coverage that I wanted. This is quite a lovely bright white. I then moved on to the baskets themselves, and I'm going to be applying that same farmhouse linen to the outside and inside of the baskets. I'm not going to be doing the base just yet because when you are gluing something together, you really should make sure that the surfaces are clear. So if I add the paint, I might accidentally have the paint coming off. So it's just best to wait to paint until after you've glued pieces together. So I'm applying my paint with a brush. Again, if you find this a bit too too tedious, you could add your paint to a sprayer to do this, or just use a spray can of white paint perhaps for this step. I personally love using chalk paint. It sticks really well to most surfaces like this that have a little bit of a porous nature to them. So I'm going to be applying 2 coats on each of the baskets, again just leaving the bottom until a little bit later. When my 2 coats of paint were dry, I then took out some of my Gorilla Super Glue. I'm going to be applying that to the top rim of the painted candlestick, and then I'm also going to be using some hot glue as well so that it has that immediate hold. So just adding some little beads of glue along the top outside edge. I'm then going to be flipping the basket upside down and then attaching the candlestick to the basket. Flipping it upside down gives you a better idea of the fact that it's in the center, so it's definitely a good idea to do that. Moving on to the other basket, I have this resin casting that I have in my stash. I think it was from one of IOD's Labels Moulds, a retired design. I'm then going to take out IOD's traditional pots transfer. I really wanted to use some of the blue designs because I liked the combination of the blue with the creams and the whites. I'm also not going to be painting my resin casting. Again, I like the cream with the white. So I've trimmed off this small text. I'm going to take off the word Paris first because I want that to go up the top, and I know I'm going to have to trim and adjust the layout of this text to fit my section in the center because obviously it's not very big. I'm going to continue to trim the transfer, just taking little bits and pieces off that I think will work. I definitely want this longer section down the bottom as well. I believe it could be an address, so I just really liked the variation in text size. So I've trimmed it all apart, and now I'm going to take the backing off the Paris design first and then position that up the top. This was a little bit fiddly, a little bit tricky, so I definitely went quite slow, and I'm just using my transfer tool to rub and burnish that. I'm going slow. You can see I've got my fingers holding that in place as well. Then I'm going to pick a corner and I'm going to lift that up as I rub. I then repeated the same steps for the rest of the small text transfers. For the smallest text, after I'd removed the backing and positioned it in place, I actually ended up just using my fingernail to do this because it was such tiny lettering. Of course, you could still use the corner of the transfer tool. I just went with my nails, so just make sure you go really slow when you're working with text this small. Next, I'm going to use my hairdryer to heat up my resin piece. It has been cast for a while, so obviously I am going to have to heat it up so that it will become pliable. Then I'm going to add some hot glue to the back, and I'm also going to be adding some of my Gorilla Super Glue as well, just for a little bit of extra hold, just adding a few little dabs of that. And then once I'm happy with that, I will be adding it to the surface of the basket and really molding it. So I have heated it up so it is warm. So I'm just bending it, and then I did actually take out my hairdryer and apply a little bit more heat again just to help it curve to the surface. And here's a look at our finished projects. I think these turned out really sweet. The IOD mold with the transfers on it really takes that basket to a whole new level, and adding the candlestick to the basket brings it to new heights. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. I really hope that you've enjoyed today's video and that it's given you some ideas on how you can give baskets that you have in your home or that you thrift a makeover. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find most of the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.